To the long box. Today we'll be looking at The Amazing Spider-Man number 228, published in May of 1982 for 60 cents. Story written by Jan Schnad and penciled by Rick Leonardi. The cover shows Spidey swinging down on a man in torn-up clothes and covered with black spiders, and promises the most shocking offbeat mystery of the year, Murder by Spider. Cover art by Nesser and Rubenstein. And while this exact scene is not in the story, it does give a nice tease to the feel of the story. And I have to say, this was a really interesting tale. It was well contained within the issue, good pacing, intriguing storyline, and a really low ridiculous factor, which is nice. So let's dig in. The story begins with Spidey swinging toward a large old house. It's raining and nighttime. A strange feeling has pulled him to this house 3 times already this evening during his patrols. A disquiet sensation, gentle but insistent, unshakable. It is this feeling and not the rain that makes him shiver. That is some good writing. He decides to finally take a closer look. Peering through the windows, he sees that most of the rooms are empty, aside from furniture, and the only person he finds is an old man eating dinner. The feeling is still pulling him, but he can't sense any danger from the old man. He reluctantly swings away, unsure of why he was drawn there. The man, Alday Schmidt, is a hermit and a collector. He is used to being alone once the nurse leaves for the day, but this time he's not actually alone. One by one, spiders arrive, crawling up the table, his chair, his body, until it is too late. At the same time, not far away, Spidey stumbles upon a mugging by some young toughs. Perhaps he thinks a scare from him will make them give up crime and finally get jobs. As he's swooping down to grab a young one, a change starts to come over him, from compassion to rage in an instant. He begins to pummel the muggers like some red-headed stepchildren. Spidey comes to his senses as a mugger begs for mercy. He stumbles away, thinking the previous issue's death of the Black Cat is to blame. Unfortunately, his behavior has pushed the opinion of the 2 muggies into J. Jonah Jameson levels of misunderstanding, and they call Spider-Man an uncontrollable maniac. The next morning at the Daily Bugle, Peter is still questioning his behavior of the night as he overhears Jonah trying to convince the editor that Spider-Man is the one responsible for a bizarre murder that has occurred. The man he himself visited last night was bitten to death by a horde of spiders. In only Jameson's particular way of skewing things, if Ant-Man can control ants, then Spider-Man must be able to control spiders. Robbie Robinson, city editor and man with alliteration problems as bad as Peter Parker, Reed Richards, and Bruce Banner combined, argues with Jonah, and Peter pipes in, but he won't hear it from a lowly freelance photographer. Jameson storms off as Robbie tells Pete that the man killed, Schmidt, had a small fortune in antiques and no family to claim it, so there's no motive for profit and no leads to the murder. Intriguing. Pete decides to go to the auction to check things out and decides to bring along past love interest Deborah Whitman for her interest in antiques, if he can pry her away from her new boyfriend Biff Rifkin, which is ironic since she ended up with Biff because Peter kept dissing her, eventually causing a mental breakdown. So, good plan, Pete. Meanwhile, in a hole in the wall so nondescript it's called Bar, 2 men meet up to exchange an envelope of money for a pair of large blue earrings, apparently for his aunt. Who are these men? What is their connection to the story? Who knows for sure? I mean, they do, but they ain't saying nothing. A week later, Peter and Deborah show up at the auction held at the late Alday Schmidt's house. Peter is so wrapped up in his thoughts he mistakes her saying history for mystery, and she says his mind seems like it's a million miles away. Pete makes the connection that his crazy outburst occurred at the same time as the spider murder. Deborah tries to get his attention. "Look, Pete, isn't it lovely?" "Yeah, sure, whatever, leave me alone." Rude. As Deborah is looking at an antique quill, a man comes up and snatches it out of her hand, saying he just purchased all the French pieces and they belong to him, so don't touch my stuff. Who starched his underwear indeed? We find out that the rude jerk is Norman Junk, clever last name there, a wealthy antique dealer who has been after Mr. Schmidt's collection for ages, and now he has it. Very interesting. Coincidence? Intrigued at this coincidence, Pete runs off, making Deborah feel like a used dish rag, which is why she dates obnoxious men like Biff Rifkin, because at least he's considerate with his obnoxiousness. After changing into his Spidey suit, he web-slings around town, following the man, thinking that even though this is just a hunch, there's worse ways to kill a Saturday afternoon. Perhaps like going out of your way to invite a woman who's into you and then ditching her without a word? Come on, Pete, be more aware. Suddenly, he gets that feeling again that's pulling him in a different direction. Abandoning the follow, he instead goes with the feeling, which brings him to the Montana apartment complex, home to wealthy and influential people of New York. The doorman sees Spidey and must be a reader of J. Jonah Jameson because he decides to call the police when he does, worried about his residence. The signal pulls him into an open window on an upper floor, and while Spidey goes searching, the police show up, hoping to catch Spidey in the act of something bad. As Spidey corners the origin of the signal, thinking about the signal causing the spiders to attack Schmidt, his head begins burning like it did before he erupted into a rage and attacked the muggers. He understands now that if he feels this way, a million spiders nearby are feeling the same. He forces himself to concentrate and he hears a wail coming down the hall. He comes upon a gaggle of cops trying to break into the room where the scream escaped. Unaware that they are there for him, he tells them to get out of the way so he can help and pushes his way through with more force and aggression than he normally would, the rage caused by the signal slowly taking over. He opens the door as the rage inside him subsides, starting to feel human again. Spiders are all over the walls, scurrying away from the woman unmoving on the floor. He grabs her, knowing her body is in shock but breathing, and the police follow in behind him, guns drawn, telling him to freeze. They've caught him red-handed. Spidey tells them he needs a hospital whether they like it or not. He's getting her there as he bursts out the window. As he swings away, patient in hand, he thinks through what has happened. Something being transmitted from the apartment or the intended victim themselves has to be the answer. Minutes later, he swings into the hospital much quicker than an ambulance would and gets her immediate care. As they wheel her away, the woman mumbles something about someone taking her earrings. And that someone was Spidey, who recognized the fact that hidden inside the earring was tiny circuitry that caused the signal. Later, in as much dramatic effect you can convey through cartoon panels, a newspaper is blown down the dark alley into the warehouse district, where all overly dramatic scenes take place. A hand reaches down and picks up the paper, and a bespectacled man in a hat who looks very similar to one of the men earlier meeting up in the bar named Bar, probably also in the warehouse district. The man is pleased that Spider-Man is being implicated in the spider murders, but worries that he may be trying to clear his name and could interfere with this person's entire operation. In an expositional thought that would make a Bond villain jealous, we learn that the man never wanted to resort to crime, but since no one was into his world-shattering arthropods research, he had to make money on his own, selling miniature attractors for the purpose of murder, as most reputable scientists do. And the money is good because not everyone can make YouTube videos. He decides to build a stronger device to control Spider-Man completely, then shakes his fist and laughs to himself under an overly dramatic single bulb hanging light. He plans to put an end to this meddling forever. After discovering the earrings were transmitters, Spidey is out swinging about town looking for clues to who may be responsible. The signal starts up again, much stronger than before, and he swings into the warehouse district knowing the source is close. He rips open a door and spews forth one of the lamest Spidey quips I've ever heard. "Heads up, faithful one, you ordered a spider, you've got one." Well, that was anticlimactic. Standing in the shadows is the man in glasses, greeting Spider-Man, showing that he knew he was coming. Even Spidey is underwhelmed. "Give it up, Specs." "On the contrary," he says, "my work is only begun." Wait, has only begun. Is only beginning. Has beginning to begun. Anyway, Specs hits a button and Spidey falls, holding his head, feeling like he's been hit by a truck, but holding on to his consciousness. Spidey asks for an explanation, and Specs just gives it to him, having only gotten to the third week of the mail order course, so you've got a ridiculous plan to make money and want to be a supervillain. The old woman was attacked so her nephew could collect his inheritance. Schmidt was killed so Junk could get the antiques he always wanted. It all makes sense now. Spidey notices the shadow of the box falling on top of him and dives away, barely missing it. While his reflexes are on point, his spidey sense is on the fritz due to the signal bearing down on his brain. Specs has built the signal to purposely negate his spidey sense so that he could more easily dispose of him. But apparently, never reading a Spider-Man comic before, he didn't know how ridiculous an assumption that would be. Spidey barely dodges bullets as Specs berates him for not being as quippy as he heard he was, and apparently he wasn't quiet because he was embarrassed by his whole spider order quip earlier. He was just busy counting the bullets. And with a thwip, there goes the gun. Specs runs into the other room, trying to distract Spidey with prattling about it being an accident and a misunderstanding, and attaches an explosive to the door. Spidey tells him he's delaying the inevitable. Even without his Spidey sense, he's still got the proportionate strength of a hyperactive daddy longlegs. And according to Wikipedia, the common daddy longlegs is used for several species, especially Pholcus phalangoides, but it is also the common name for several other arthropod groups, including harvestmen and crane flies. So, that's information. Specs hides back, waiting for Spidey to open the door like a fool. Kablam goes the dynamite. Specs is self-congratulating, thinking no one will underestimate him again as the man who killed Spider-Man. He's wondering where the body is when a light blinds him from above, and Spidey is there, fully equipping like we know he can, shining his spider light on him, which he probably ordered from this very comic book. Explaining that he almost fell for the trap, but being extra cautious without his Spidey sense, he made a quick shield with his web, tossed something else at the door, and bingo bango, Robert is your grandfather's adult male son. Spidey swings down as Specs tries to flee, quacks him right in the ass, and insults him to boot. He crushes the device, what was giving him all that trouble, essentially destroying any evidence of anything that had happened that would help clear his name, unfortunately. His spider sense springs into action seconds before the cops burst in. Spidey swings away, saying he's got a hot date with a bath, and that this fella probably wanting to confess to keep Spidey from beating him up and berating him anymore. As he swings into the night, he ruminates on his adventure. He hurt his shoulder, ripped his costume, got no pictures for the Bugle, and didn't even find out the guy's name. Let's not forget he also destroyed all evidence and left Deborah hanging yet again, leading to her inevitable psychosis. Oh, Spidey, you scamp. And that's it. That was The Amazing Spider-Man number 228. All in all, a really excellent issue. Great storytelling from the beginning to end, and not much bad to say about it. A fun, interesting mystery and story well contained in one issue, and wrapped up with a neat bow. What happens next after this? Well, that's another issue. Thanks for stopping by the Long Box.